Oh, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time it is when you're watching this. For me, it is 11 a.m. and it's Friday, July 23rd, 2021. Another Action Unit V3 live stream, and today we're going to be resuming work on the test context. So let's get right into it. We're going to try. Got a new version of Visual Studio 2022 preview. I'm going to try it again. It sort of made me annoyed last time when we did this, but we'll see if I can survive. Okay, so where did we land? So since the last time we got together, I definitely put together a few changes along the way. I think we had like 3 or 4 work in progress commits that I ended up collapsing into one. So where did we end? One thing I did was I moved the failure cause computation out of where it was and into exception utility into this thing, which is basically doing the extract metadata. You'll see why I needed to do that in just a moment. Really kind of belonged here anyway. This thing is returning a giant tuple, which makes me unhappy, but the alternative would be to put together a data structure, which I suppose I could do. Anyway, this is the code that does that. Remember that we look for, by convention, if your exception implements an iTest timeout exception, that means you're a timeout. If you implement an iAssertion exception, that you're an assertion. Otherwise, you're just a straight up exception failure. Test failed is where we used to do this. This is a little bit of a, I'm doing an ignore space change on this. This is a little bit of, this is like a little factory method for test failed, where you hand it an exception. And today, I moved that code out of here. This is already calling extract metadata anyway, so we can just grab the cause there out of the metadata. Another thing I ended up having to do was I moved output, the ability to get the current output onto iTest output helper, so that we can sort of extract that at different points. And we'll see where that comes into play. Test Invoker. So let's skip the test for a moment. Let's go look at the actual work that was done. Test Invoker. The big change here is that Test Invoker sets the test context to say that we're initializing at the top of its work, and then we say we're running. Then we run the test, and then we basically get a post-run test state out of that. And that post-run test state is a virtual, because Test Invoker doesn't really know anything about output, so it's going to pass string empty for output when it's creating the post-run test state from the exception, if an exception exists. So this test state from exception we'll bring in a test state with the given status. And then if there's no exception, you're considered to be passed. Otherwise, we grab the exception of the extract metadata. This is why we moved cause into extract metadata, so that I could also have access to cause here. Right? And then we added a new state for this, the post-run test state. We added a new state for this, which is cleaning up status. We added a new status, which is cleaning up. And this kind of came about because towards the end of the stream last time, it occurred to me that we were going to need to know that the test has finished running, but we're not done cleaning up after it yet, because people want to be able to go get the test context and get the test status in things like the after attribute for before the after call and before after attributes, or the dispose or dispose async methods of the test class. And so we need to be able to indicate that the test was at least done running, even if we aren't done with all the meta work related to the test yet. So that became the cleaning up status. And something I noticed here was this invoke test method async virtual that's here had originally been slated to return the amount of time spent running, but the reality is that that's not the total time anyway. So we don't need that. We're using the timer to record all the things that are related to runtime. So I'll talk about that a little bit in the documentation for the context objects when we get there. All right, so that's the test invoker. So test invoker, remember we have like this 6 layers of stuff. Test invoker is like this magical 7th layer that really is sort of an implementation detail of the test runner, which is to run a test. And the test invoker as a plugin point is sort of abstracting, like test runner is, okay, we're going to start running the test, so I'll do some of the bookkeeping on running the test. And then I'll call the test invoker to actually invoke the test, which in the case of normal XUnit is, go off and run the test method, which is what this is. This invoke test method async that's sitting here, right? That is our invocation. So the next layer up is test runner. So once again, at the beginning of test runner, we set ourselves to initializing, and then we keep track of a test result. We already were doing things for skipped here. We don't have to send the message here because I moved that down and you made that common code based on the test result, which is why test result is up at this level here now, where it used to be down here at this level. So I've cleaned that code up a little bit. So this logic is pretty much the same. The difference is this is now using the test failed factory function, which is really what it should use before, rather than trying to extract all the metadata itself. So we do that. And then we set the test context for the test from the test results, and this will be finished. So this is after everything is all cleaned up. So what's missing in here that's sort of hidden in between all of this, because we don't have enough context, is the actual call over the test invoker. Right, so test invoker happens in the middle here. So you might notice that we do initializing twice, and that's really for testing purposes, but it's also to ensure that every time something runs, like the test invoker, we end up in a situation where if we didn't have a test context set up yet, we make sure that we have initializing. That's basically to help us in the test case. My nose is running, so hang on one second. Sorry about that. It's weird. All right. So down to the test runner again. Most of this has basically stayed the same, except we set up test context a little bit here and there. That's about it. And like I said, I move this down a level. If I turn off ignore space changes here and we look at test runner, you can see that it's obvious that this got moved out a level. It's a little bit. Sometimes I like having a space change ignored. Sometimes I don't. Weird like that. All right, so then the XUnit versions of these, the XUnit test invoker and the XUnit test runner, these are the things that are specific to XUnit.net, right? Test invoker, test runner, those are the generic extensibility base classes that you can use. So XUnit test invoker, XUnit test runner, these are the things that are like, okay, well, I know how to deal with, facts and iTest output helper and things like that. So the XUnit test invoker now takes the test output helper. We're going to need access to that in order to be able to construct an object, to get the output to construct the test status object. So we need that. This we mentioned earlier, this signature, this change doesn't have decimal anymore. Same, we don't need it here. And so this is our override for create post test create post run test state. And now you can see here that we grab the test helper output to put the output into the test state object. Execute test runner, similarly, invoke test method async. We need to now pass along the test output helper here. So that's what got added here as well. It's now taking the test output helper to pass along, and it gets that from this function up here. So small changes here just to get things plumbed through. So let's talk a little bit about where we are in terms of the test context object. We have access to the test with a to-do, which is this stuff comes from Execute v3. Is this the appropriate dependency? We'll come back to this later. At the moment, I don't care all that much. We have test output helper commented out as something is going to be available. And as you see, I started working on that. That's where we're going to start focusing on today. In terms of documentation, you know, the big thing that has really changed here is in the text of things like output, or things where we talk about which states are going to be available in which result modes or which status modes. So execution time and output are these things that we continue to collect during the cleaning up phase. And so the documentation needs to indicate that a partial value will be available during cleaning up. Final value is only available during finished. All right, that's true for output as well. So if you were to look at the value from output, for example, in the dispose of the test class, it would be the output that was generated by the test itself. But then if you went to go ahead and grab more out, like if you in your dispose put more things in the output and then went to go grab it, you wouldn't see it here because the state of it is such that you only get to see what has already been written. Although we could probably change that. Like you could make this output be dynamic by passing along the iTest output helper to this thing, but this sort of violates my thought on this being really just like an immutable state that doesn't change out from underneath you. So I'm kind of okay with just leaving it the way it is. But that was the big thing, was coming through here and updating all the docs to talk about cleaning up in addition to finished, and which things are valid and won't change versus which things are sort of in the middle of being changed. And then we have our from exception factory method here, and then we have our from test result here. So the from exception is used right now by the test invoker, and from test result is used by the test runner. And of course, added cleaning up. In terms of tests, yeah, so the results sync tests needed error metadata. That's fine, sure. So in terms of tests, this is where I'm going to do the ignore space change because it makes a huge difference because I've indented stuff. So the test invoker tests, I basically grouped them together into messages, execution, failing, too many parameter values. Messages and execution. These are the actual tests inside of execution. I cleaned these up. They were being passed a message bus. It was never being used, so I just made the message bus optional. And then we added some test context visibility tests. So before anything starts going, we should be in the initializing state, right? That's obvious based on our code, right? We do initializing right up front. So in our before, we're in the initializing state. While we're executing, you should see that we're in the running state. All right, so this is the running state. This is the initializing state. In both of these cases, you'll see there's really not much interesting to look at because we're currently in states that don't really have any more information to relay. And then we get down to passing and failing. And you notice there's no skip here, and that's because skip is handled up in the test runner. So test invoker never sees something that is supposed to be statically skipped. Okay, so after we're passing, and then we see ourselves in the cleaning up state with passed. We get access to the output. We have no failure cause, obviously, no exception information, but we do have execution time. And then similarly, if we are in a failing situation, what we will see is we obviously have exception messages. We have a single exception with a single stack trace. We're not going to bother to verify it, but we have lots of other code that tests that stuff. But we also have exception time. We have a failure cause here, which is an assertion, right? Because we did assert true false. But our state is failed and we're cleaning up. And then lastly, if we just throw a random exception, right, it's pretty much the same as what's up here, except the message is now just straight up the exception message. And our failure cause is an exception rather than an assertion, because this wasn't an assertion failure. This is just a straight up exception. And then just some cleanup here for this. Test runner tests. We have a few cases, passing, failing, skipping, where we are also inspecting all of our values that come out of here. So this is where we now see a skipped version. And then verifying that the output that we have in our output object also shows up in our test context test state. And then I think that's probably all that really matters. Right, test context test. There's just one test that basically says, hey, I'm running. Can I see my own test context? And the answer is yes. You can see your own test context while you're running. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of what we need to review. So now where did I land? I'm trying to get the test output helper into the test context. And that's proving to be a little bit more complex than I had originally thought it might be. And we'll talk about why that is here in just a moment, but where am I? So test runner is getting a new abstract, invoke test async, which returns a tuple of decimal and a string, where decimal is time and string is output. I'm not sure if this is the right signature for this, but we're just kind of like poking around and playing and seeing what everything looks like. So this was previously invoke test context async was down here, so it moved up here. And then this is just because I got alphabetized. And then this is set context, which is also virtual, which is test context, set context for this given test state. And again, this becomes virtual because in the XUnit version, we need to override it to theoretically add a test output helper into the test context object. So if we're in the initializing state, then obviously we need a new test output helper. Otherwise, we use the test output helper that's already there. And then the test context. The changes here, I obviously forgot to make these private setters, right? This is part of the immutable changes that were being made here. We don't always have a test context, so that should have been nullable. These are just like fixing up some of the obvious things. I uncommented this again to get test output helper in here, and then there's test state, and then test output helper. When we take that now as a parameter here, and if you don't give it to us, we go and grab the current test output helper and throw it in there. I'm not sure if this is the right thing or not. I mean, in retrospect, it probably isn't, but we'll see. So one of the interesting side results of this is that the test output helper, like I don't see where this stuff gets initialized. I think that didn't change. So let's go take a look at that. I test output. Now let's do test output helper, the class. Let's see who calls initialize. So that's an XUnit test runner. So this must have changed in the previous change set, and I just ran over it and totally didn't pay attention to it. But this definitely must have changed because this used to go digging around inside the constructor arguments to go find the test output helper and then initialize it. And now it grabs it from the test context. But what's interesting here is we now have this dichotomy where test output helper could be made in two different places. So one of the things we want to do when we look at the constructor of this thing, which there does not appear to be an official constructor, so let's go ahead and make one just so we can have it tracked with this. So XUnit test class runners, that's where the old place where we would make it. An XUnit test runner, this is the new place where we're making it. So this is kind of the interesting problem that we have here with the XUnit test class runner. Let's go get rid of this. Right now, when we try and get all the constructor arguments in XUnit test class runner, one of the things we do is say, if one of the constructor arguments is an iTest output helper, then we will just new up a test output helper and throw it in there. Problem is, we really want this test output helper to be the same as the one that's in the test context. So where we are today with test context is we just new one up because we don't know any better. The test context doesn't really have access to the constructor arguments for the test. It probably could. Actually, it probably does have access to that stuff. But also, by having test output helper in the context, it sort of implies that you want to be able to have access to run output, to be able to do output without having to take it as a constructor argument. So this is fine. We still want to be able to support tests that take iTest output helper as a constructor argument. We just want to line all that stuff up. And so the challenge I'm faced with at the moment is I obviously need the way this works at the moment is for every constructor argument, we go get that constructor argument. So given the constructor and the index, which we don't know why we need the index. It does not appear that we need the index, but anyway, it's there probably from test class runner, right? If I go look at the test class runner version, it probably uses that in the message. Or not. So the default for this says I don't know how to make constructor arguments. That's fine. The constructor arguments here either come from iTest output helper or collection or class fixtures. So I think what I want here is, what if this allowed both T and func of T for argument value. So this is my thought. What if I were to basically be able to make a func of T that returned a test output helper, right? So I could say my func was given a test context, I'll give you back the test output helper. Right? Don't know what this is, so implicitly type, sure, you're a func of iTest output helper. Oh, actually, yeah, you don't need that. What you really want is context here is to be test context current test output helper. So if I could pass this back, and then the place where these constructor arguments are sent into the test class could say, hey, by the way, as I'm going through all these constructor arguments, if the argument is of type T, but the value you gave me is a func of type T, I'll just call it to go get the value. That should work. Sorry, I have to blow my nose again. I'm not getting a summer cold. Okay, so that's where I am at the moment, trying to sort of reconcile these two lifetimes of the test output helper object. At the moment, if I were to just comment all of this out, what we would find if we tried to run the core tests is we should have some tests that just fail to run because they are trying to use a test output helper. And so all of these don't necessarily look exactly like what you would expect. Somewhere in here, what's happening is we're expecting tests to run and they're not running because of the lack of test output helper. But these tests don't necessarily tell you that directly. You have to go look at one of them. So let's go look at one of them. Next unit acceptance test 650. Right, so this fails because this test should have passed. This is class under test. This class under test has an iTest output helper, and that's why it can't succeed. Because what we would find if we were to come and debug in this is that we would have a failed test instead because of an unmatched constructor argument. At least that's my theory, no pun intended. All right, so our messages are going to look like no. Okay, that's ridiculous. Prevent an unsafe abort when evaluating the function, blah, blah, blah. Get all threads may have changed the state of the process. Whatever. Anyway, we should see a failed, right? So if we were to do messages of 6, right, we see a failed. So this is a test failed. Following constructor parameters does not have matching fixture data. iTest output helper. Okay, so that's pretty much what I expected to see. And if I were to instead put this argument value in here as this, all right, so let's change this. To this. To that. Now what we should see is a similar error. Not because it couldn't find the test output helper, but rather because it tried to pass a func of iTest output helper where we actually wanted an iTest output helper. All right. Yeah, I understand. You had to run some code. Get over it. Well, this is a 2022 thing, or if I'd be getting this in 2019 yet as well. So there's no cast there. Give me messages, please. So our failed is now at index 8. Constructor on class under test not found. All right, so that's the argument not matching up. So, Xunit 3 acceptance tests, test output. Let's go ahead and do this. What the fuck is this? Debug launch profiles UI? What the fuck is this? Okay, fine. Xunit 3 acceptance tests output. Of course it's modal. Of course it's modal. That's exactly what I fucking wanted. God. Really? Test output, send output messages. Alright, well. This is great, because I'm going to take this away, and I'm going to tell VS22 that it can go screw itself. Because, yeah. You got, what, 20 minutes again. Good job. Stop making stupid changes, especially stupid changes that make my life worse. You know, I have the same problem with Windows 11. Okay? Here, let me show you. So here, we're on Wi-Fi, obviously. You know what I used to be able to do here when I clicked on the network? I used to be able to connect and disconnect my VPN. You want to see how many times I have to click to get that to be done? So it used to be 2 clicks, right? Click here, click connect, done. All right, 1, 2, 3, because it's not Wi-Fi settings, 4, 5, 6. I have to click 6 times for what used to be 2 times. Right? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Really? Are you kidding me? Anyway. Yes, thank you for wasting more of my time. Visual Studio and Windows 11. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Enough ranting. All right. I was here. Trying to make it so that I can run those things faster. Xunit 3 acceptance tests. Test output. Okay. So that's this problem here. Let's go ahead and close some of these things. So I think it's test invoker that invoke test method async. My parameter counts. So this is a parameter count mismatch. Test method arguments. So somewhere in here we're going to use test method arguments and allow the passing of the func. That's probably in call test method, which at the moment says test method invoke given this, and here's our test method arguments. Question is, where and when do the arguments need to get converted? So like test invoker doesn't know about this at this moment. But Xunit test invoker, because remember, iTest output helper is an Xunit feature and not a test framework feature in general. So it's probably Xunit test invoker where this logic belongs. And so the Xunit test invoker, does it override call test method? It does not. Wow, this file isn't even remotely sorted. All right, so here's our override of invoke test, or our call test method. Okay, so what do we need here? We need to convert. First of all, we need it to look like this. We allow for func of t when the argument is t. So we'll just write a little note here. Why is it we're doing this right here, right? Our actual test method arguments is test method arguments select and you want this to be an array. Maybe null here, huh? I do that, and we might get null back, right? But that becomes the right type again. Okay. But I'm not 100% sure I want to trust that. Let's do this. Okay. So here we need to do the transformation, which would basically be what we need is we need to sort of zip in the constructor argument types, which are where. Actually, doing this with a link probably isn't going to work, is it? This is going to be too hard. All right. Object, actual test method arguments. We're going to start out with null, and then we're going to say if test method arguments is not equal to null, we're going to do something else. And then you get used there. And then you. All right. So what we need is ctor argument type. It's going to be test. Do we have the information here? We might not have the information here. I wonder if it's in test method is a test method. Oh no, it's not the test method. We want the test class. Class. Interesting that I don't have access to the constructor arguments here. How did I get access to them? Way the hell out. Where were we when we saw those things? XUnit test class runner, right? It's going to be class type, get constructors, blah, blah, blah. So we pick the constructor, argument. Right, so I really don't want to redo this logic. I'm not sure I have a way around it though. Yeah, I'm not sure I have a way around it. Let's leave ourselves to do. Don't like redoing the logic from action task class runner here. Actually, we're going to move you down there because that's actually where it's going to be. All right, let's get the constructor. All right. We don't have type because it's not an iType info. So we need reflection type info. Oh, whoops, this is a class. Okay, we want to format it like we've been formatting it elsewhere. Should only be one of these. So the constructor argument type is going to be constructor parameters. This is the parameter infos, right? You mad because constructor no? Get parameters. Oh, hold on. So that's going to return me a parameter info array, right? So ctor params subindex parameter type. Value type is going to be test method arguments dot arguments index get type. Okay, so we'll do this. Which we should, it's fine. Okay, so if we have a value type for our constructor argument, then we look at the parameter type and we say if ctor argument parameter type is not equal to the CTOR argument value type, and the CTOR argument value type is generic type. CTOR argument value type, get the generic type definition is equal to type of func. Probably don't need all that. What we can do is CTOR argument value type is type of func. Make generic type from the parameter type. All right. So if the types aren't equal, and the value type is a func of the argument type, we're going to put this up here just kind of as a starter. I just want to keep diving into our ifs. And we're going to say the actual test method arguments index is equal to we need to invoke this func. Right, func. You are a delegate. Oh. I think that means you have an invoke method on you. All right, let's just run this through debugger, see where we are. Not all code paths return a value. Yeah, I know. That's interesting. Okay, so we should come through here once for the test method itself. All right, and that's the test output class. And then here, we should have come through there again, but we didn't. Why? Use a real XUnit test framework here. So why? All test method, this is an override. Okay. So that should be for test output, yep. Now this is for test output, yep. Now we're here, and none of that stuff triggers. Okay, let's try this. So this is now test output, run async. Still don't understand why we're not getting in there. Because we haven't constructed the class yet? Oh my god, this is called test method. Oh, this is not... I am so in the wrong place. This is not test method arguments. This is constructor arguments. Shoot. This is not where I wanted to be. Wow, this is so not where I wanted to be. I need to be where we create the test class, which is in test invoker. Create test class. So create test class is a virtual in test invoker. So if I want an override for that, create test class. Wow. Talk about not being in the right place, huh? Okay. That was the old code I had there. I mean, I had the right logic, I just put it in the wrong place. All right, so create test class has a bunch of this stuff where they basically say, here is activate or create instance on our constructor arguments, which makes more sense because, yes, constructor arguments. Constructor arguments is not virtual. I mean, looking at this, create test class. I could just isolate this for an easier override, right? I mean, this is way too much logic to want to duplicate everywhere. All right, extract a method. Create test class instance. At the times of creation of the test class, responsible for sending messages to override just the behavior, creating the instance of a test class. Override create test class instance instead. Okay, so this is now protected virtual. Creates the instance of the test class. By default, uses activator. Create instance. Why are you upset? You're the one who told me to do it. Apparently it doesn't like the nullable attributes in there. Test class and should override this in order to change the input values and or use a factory method other than activator create instance. All right. Okay. Now, if I come through here to create test class instance, cute. The end of this should be activator create instance test class constructor arguments. All right, that's what it is here. Test class constructor arguments. Okay. Except it's not really going to be constructor arguments. It's going to be actual constructor arguments. All right, because that's what you want. Activator create instance. All right. Okay. So if constructor arguments is not equal to null, constructor arguments length, constructor arguments length, constructor arguments. Okay. Makes more sense to put the code in the right place. Okay, so the test class, which by the way we have as test class, means I didn't really need to dive all the way down into that, so let's go ahead and fix that. Test class is type. This is already a type. So I don't even have to check for null, because we know what we've got, right? So your test class. Test class, get constructors. Give me the single constructor, give me the parameters for that constructor. That's fine. Actual constructor arguments is go new one up. Okay, let's go. So this is test output. That's the outer one. We don't need that. This is our inner one. Okay, so here's constructor arguments. We should have one, which is going to be a func of I test output helper. It's a nice anonymous little lambda type here, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? I never really thought about whether that thing was going to be okay. So it is a func. It is a func of I test output helper. Okay, good. So there's our parameters. Our parameters are I test output helper. Moment, that is the func. What methods do you have? You have an invoke method, right? You have an invoke method. Okay, so that was the other thing I wanted to see was make sure you had an invoke method. Which takes no parameters. If we don't have a problem with that, then we're going to just call invoke method. We're going to invoke the invoke method, the result of which should be an object from not overload for invoke. Oh, we need an object to invoke it on. It is the constructor arguments of index. And then no parameters. Okay. Now let's see what happens. Okay, I'm all right with that. Let's move that down here. All right. We've got our invoke method. We did not get an invoke method. Really? That's because I shouldn't have called get type. It's already a type. Type of a type is type. No, I'm not kidding. Okay. Now we have an invoke method. What's going to happen when we invoke this? Curiosity. So we get our test output helper. Brilliant. That means our test ran with the test output helper. Look at that. Okay. Now all of our tests are running. Okay, so we haven't broken anything, but what we did was we moved the creation logic for test output helper. It's now only in one place. It's now only in XUnit test runner. And I said that I wasn't super confident that I wanted to do that, and I actually don't think I want to do that there. But no, that's going to break things. I guess that does need to be there. So basically, if you're chaining through, you should always take the old one. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So that gets our test output helper where we want it. Let's do an add. I'm going to build. Apparently we got a new version of .NET. Sure, why not? Let's go take a look at what we have. Okay. So here's our new virtual. Here's our virtual for setting the test context so that we can pull output into it. XUnit test class runner. XUnit test class runner. Apparently I left that commented out line of code in here. Lives in XUnit test invoker dot create test class instance. So there's test invoker, test runner, test class runner. Which no longer is newing up a test output helper. Instead, create test class instance. We know there's always going to be one because we have a gate somewhere else. Prevents it from being anything else. And if you're a type mismatch and your type mismatch is exactly func of whatever you're supposed to be looking for, then we just invoke it and go get it. Okay. And yep, so the test runner now pulls test output helper from test context and news it up if we don't have one, but only if you're initializing. Let's add more comment here. Created in XUnit test runner set test context. This would also be where the DI for test context would live. All right. Okay. Move test context. Move test output helper creation into the test context. Update DI code. Can I put whip on this? Because I'm really not sure if this is how exactly the commits will be constructed. And I assume you finished running tests. I'm going to close one of you, especially the VS 2022 one. You can go away. All right. So there's that. So that gets us test injection. So let's go ahead and do this, the DI for test context. So this is going to be the XUnit test class runner tests. Do we do output here? Or you don't have to be whole words, or is it only in the acceptance tests? I guess it's only in the acceptance tests. Test output. Let's go ahead and do test context as well. Context, acceptance test v3. And inject test context. Class under test. So can't directly inject the test context because the test context itself is immutable, right? So what we really want is can inject test context accessor. So that would be test context accessor. Immutable snapshot of current test state, time it's retrieved. This should be very interesting. This should be very simple. This should just be test context, current get. Snapshot of the current state of test execution. So that needs a backing class. Where do we put test output helper? Where is test output helper? You're in SDK frameworks. Okay. Default implementation of test context accessor. You need one of those, and it's really literally going to be test context current. And actually, you should be nullable. You need to be an inherit doc. Easy enough. This does not need to be This does not need to have an instance, because it's basically just static. Okay. So here is where we would have the test context accessor, right? So we would say something like if parameter type is type of test context accessor. Right, sure. So what do our acceptance tests look like? Can inject test context accessor. Yeah, you don't need to be like that. You can be like that. Assert not null. Accessor. Assert same accessor dot current with this context dot current. Does not contain a definition for current, really? That's true. Okay. So then we just basically do this. We will run async of the class under test. Oh, whoops, no. We want the test passed of the class under test. Oh, really, I don't know what else to say about that. That's obviously not going to work. Because it failed. Test context accessor. So I executed 3 acceptance tests. Three acceptance tests. We can kind of do this. So get us the display name. Then now we should fail here. I should be able to see why. Messages. Alright, so there's failed. So we have test failed, messages of 6. Messages. All constructor parameters not match Fisher data. I test constructor accessor, right? That's what we expected because we haven't actually implemented it yet. Okay. So over here in our class runner, actually that can stay there because we're not going to use that. We're going to use this argument value is test context accessor instance. I don't actually need a func of t for this because it's static instance anyway, right? And then that's the name of the test that passed. Take it. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I need anything else. Seems like reasonable enough. I mean, test context accessor is dead simple. So there's not really any sense checking it to make sure that it works, because obviously it works here. So in any other context where we have it, it would be the exact same as test context current. Okay, but if people want to inject it now, they can inject it. Okay. Let's go to you. Let's add and build. Back over here. Okay. So that's our new acceptance test. That's our accessor interface. That's our accessor instance. And there's where we DI it. I feel like all three of these commits are really one commit, which is introduce static test context with injection for test information. On every layer in this, the 6 layers of stuff, every layer that I put in there goes up as a separate commit. Do 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 do. Oh, there we go. Let's see. Yeah, that is my belief, is that all three of these things should be one commit. And it's pretty much time to go to dev with this. Like, I'm relatively confident with this change. Maybe I'll leave it in the v3 context branch for now, but I'm relatively confident in this change. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a soft reset back to dev, right? Which will take us one back, which will give us this entire static-based test context with everything. Use test context with static accessor and DI, which covers test execution. Yeah. Okay. That does not feel like a work in progress anymore. That feels done to me. Okay. So if I were to go up the levels, right? So we're now talking about... So we've done test invoker and test runner. So the next thing up from test runner would be test case runner. Right? So test case runner has an abstract for run the test, and an XUnit test case runner. The implementation of that abstract, the test runner that's going to use is the XUnit test runner. So that's the thing we just did. So next step up, then, let's open test runner real quick. Right, so we think about this set test context here, where we have the available test context. We basically need to find the injection points in test case runner, just like we found the injection points here for example, initializing and then completing the test. So test case runner pretty much has this exact same pattern, right? Where we would have some kind of an initializing would go here. Something to say where initializing would go here. I don't know. But this is when the test case starts. And then we run the test. So this is when we run. This is when we're done. More like that. So the interesting thing is, like, we have after test case starting async. All right, we've got nothing for those. So they're extensibility points, but they're extensibility points that we should be able to leverage to make sure that we have stuff being set. So the question is, what's next? So here we have test with our to-do. Let's see. I'm going to take the to-do out. Test context. Go ahead and push that back up. So what we would need here then is test case, right? It's the current test case. The engine is currently in the process of running test case. Will return null outside of the context of the test case. So really this is the only thing that's being added, is we're running in the context of a test case, but not yet in the context of a test. We can add not null if not null on our test now. To basically say, if test case isn't null, then we're not null. Because obviously you can't have a test without a test case. So given that, what would our test case runner tests look like? Test case runner tests. Alright, so there's messages. On-test async aggregator includes past and exceptions. Failure and after test case starting. Failure and before test case finished. Cancellation, 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 cancellation. So I kind of want failure in queue of test case starting. Does not queue test case finished. Does not run tests. Okay, failure and after test case starting gets errored. Aggregator to test case runner, no cleanup failure message. Failure before test case finished, reports cleanup failure. Does not include exceptions from after test case starting. And then we've got some cancellation stuff. So we're already overriding after test case starting async, before test case finished async. Just like we did in the other tests, we're going to put after test case starting context is test context current. You go down one. Test case, this is before test case starting in context. We're going to do one for run test async as well. Run test async as well. Okay. We're going to record those. All right. I need a break for a couple of minutes, so I'll be right back. All right. Appreciate you hanging out here while I had to go run a quick bio break. So let's get back to where we were. Okay, so we're trying to inject the context for test case information now. There's the 3 places we expect to see it. It should be the same in all 3 cases, interestingly. Like there's no, unless we do, like test state has test status. Initializing, running, cleaning up, finished. What if this wasn't... Oh, and this shouldn't have the word test case in it anyway. So thinking about this, like this status is in the middle of the state object for test, because test state has a lot of stuff in it, but does test case have state? Do we need a status? Initializing, running, cleaning up, and finished. Like, is this going to be a thing that's over and over again? What if this was called test engine status? Right, what if we called this test engine status? Initializing the related I don't know what to call this thing. Present current state is a text with respect to a phase in the execution pipeline. For example, engine status for a test collection versus test case versus test. The given stage in the pipeline, the test engine is running the given stage of the pipeline. The test engine has run the given stage of the pipeline and is currently doing cleanup. The test engine has finished the given stage of the pipeline. So if this is now test engine status, so what if I move status out of here? Now we have a lot of relationships to this, don't we? So if I look at this state, the state is only ever set for cleaning up and finished. All right, this is almost kind of like an indication that there was something weird happening, some weird state. So what if status came out to test context? Let's call it this. Public test engine status, test status, get private set. All right. Gets the current test engine status for the test. Will only be available when test is not null. That's true. And then test state only. What if we were to call this test result? The result oh, I wondered about that. Oh, that's our enum. Okay, let's go back and we undo this. Oops, that's fine. All right, we'll continue to call this test state even though I don't like the name. Okay. Test state, so exception messages, result failed, result failed, result failed. Final value is only available when test engine is in the cleaning up state. Now, it's only, final value is only available when test engine is in the finished state. The partial value is available while in cleaning up state. Okay. That is a comment I'm going to use again. That should have been the word when. Available when the test engine. Okay, yes. Test is only available when. Yep, it's in the finished state. A partial value is available when we're in the cleaning up state. That shouldn't be nullable anymore. These don't really exist anymore. And we never gave values, I never gave names to all these things. I don't think I need the status, right? Because status isn't stored here anymore. Okay. Things are definitely going to be broken. Set test context for test state initializing. This is for test state. And this is virtual. So this doesn't make sense like this, because this is now test context set for test. Here's our test. We don't necessarily always have a test state. What we do need here, though, is a test engine status. Now we can do this where the test engine status is initializing. Yes, you can be null. Test state, not null if not null test is not true anymore. I don't think there's any more like the not null if, not null when. It needs to be a bool return value. Right, but that has to be a bool return value that we could construct in an attribute, which we really can't. So sometimes this thing's just going to be null. Well, only available when test, actually that's not even right, when test status is cleaning up or finished. So let's test status. Here we have set test context for test state. It's used where? It's used right there. Set test context for finished test. So then this is going to be test engine status finished. Set the test context for the given test state. Once the test is finished running. Okay. Okay. So then that filters into here. test engine status finished. And here we would never initialize. So that's kind of an interesting one, right? The initialization logic. Okay, I changed my mind on this. So this is now set test context. And it now needs to take a test engine status, test status. Okay. And we did not hit enter. And engine status. Okay, so that's what we want for parameters now, which we got to execute test runner. That's that. This is test status. That's how we get our test output helper. Okay, what else? Set test context here needs to be finished. We need to go back to using set test context up there. Actually, we need to rearrange these. You need to go there, and you need to be, sure, whatever. You need to potentially be null. I need to go use set test context up here again. All right. Because I want to make sure we get our test output object. Let's see the current test engine status for test. Okay. Test invoker doesn't have initializing blah, 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 blah. That's true. Set for test. Test engine status. Interesting thinking here. Test output helper will be null here. I feel like that's a problem. Test output helper should exist here. Actually, it might not. All right, because this one pulls in the old test output helper. Never mind. Never mind. That's what that cascade was for that I thought I could get rid of that I couldn't get rid of. All right, so that's that. Test engine status is running. Test engine status is cleaning up. This comment doesn't matter. The default implementation will pull the exception from aggregator and the execution time from the timer and pass an empty string for output. So from exception has decimal, output, and exception. Does not need a status anymore. Because that got hoisted. And that also got hoisted. Okay. All right, so this needs to come up here, which is context.test status. So we'll move you there. So you're up here, context test status. Move you up there, and we'll move you up there, and we'll move you up there. Now we've got test runner tests, which are going to be basically the same thing. Oops. Make sure I didn't. I feel like we are stashing the wrong stuff. Should all be test context. So after starting status is going to be context.test status. For finished state, it's going to be for test finished context state. We're going to need some not null checks here. Test state. Okay, that was my bad. And we don't have the status. Instead, we have test status, which can come right here. Okay. Is that good enough? Yeah, but... Okay. Not all of it? Of course not. This one. You are part of context. Okay. That ran way too fast. I obviously have a limitation on this. Well, I guess I don't. It doesn't run that fast? No, it ran nothing. I don't understand. How do you run nothing? What did I do? And did I do it 45 minutes ago, or did I do it just now? Because I fell somewhere. There you go. Test context set for test. What did I do? Test state can, of course, test state can be null. We know it can. Extension status can't be null because it's in a enum. Okay, so we don't have to check that. It's gonna be one of those days. We're running tests now. And we have some core tests failing. All right, test context test. Ambient test context is available in test. Are not null on 16, huh? Test context tests. Test state is null. Because we're not in the right mode. But the others are just like this. Test invoker tests. It's going to be executing sees running. receives initializing, right? Yep. So in the context, we look at test status, we look at test, we look at test state. Do you not look at test output helper? That's the only other thing in there right now, right? Okay, good. Well, I mean, I can tell you right now that there's some stuff that I want here and some stuff that I definitely don't want here. And I'm going to need another amended commit. Because this restructuring, or at least another commit that just basically says, hey, I'm restructuring stuff. The thing that I don't want yet is in test context. Don't want this yet. So let's reset that and then pick it. Because I actually don't want either of those things, but I do want all of that. Then in the test case runner, I probably don't want any of this. Okay, let's take a look at our rejiggering of things. Test case runner tests. I don't need any of this either. So I don't think I do, right? That's just stashing contexts. That comes later. All right, so test status moves up and state becomes null. Status moves up, state becomes null. Status moves up, status moves up, status moves up. Status doesn't get passed. This got rearranged because we should have been saving the context and we weren't. Then output, it's fine. Saving the context. Running, that status moves up and then that gets null. This becomes test engine status, this becomes test engine status, test engine status. And test state from exception. Reverse method to create test state after the test is completed running. Default implementation will pull the exception from aggregator and execution time. Yep. Pass an empty string for output. Set test context to initializing, set test context to finished. Makes sense because this is the runner, so that's the higher level. Here's the runner. Status is separate from state now. Not 100% sure that I like these names anymore. All right, so context has test state now. Only available when status is cleaning up or finished. Now we have test status, which we'll always have if we have null. We'll always have if we have a test. And set for test comes with a status outside instead of inside the state, and the state can now be null as a result. And then there's engine status, and then there's state, and then status went away. Okay. I like that as an amended commit. And then we'll stash this, and we'll run these and make sure they run. While these are running, I'm going to go grab another can of soda, so I'll be right back. Chug, chug, chug along we go. Looks like we're towards the end here, right? V2 and V1 tests on the console runner. And then V2 and V1 tests in the EMS build runner. Okay, push that up again. Now, let's go back here to where we are now. Let's close everything and go to test context. So now we have test case. We also want test engine status. Add private set. You get a not null if not null on the test case. All right, so when we set a test case and test case status, what are some of the first things that we could do for that? So we have test case runner tests, where we're stashing status but not using it yet. Test case runner, test context. This is our happy fun. Actually, this not null is not true. The opposite is true. Make sure I put these in the right place. Test case will not be null if test is null. You can be in a test case without being in a test. You can't be in a test without being in a test case. Can't have a test helper without a test. Test state might be null. If you have a test, you always have a test status. That's true. Okay. That looks better. So a couple of things we can do. We can go sort of supplement the test runner tests, but there's also test context tests, right? That should be there. And then also the test case status should be running. So both of those are going to fail right now, because obviously we haven't set that. Currently null. Okay, so the test case runner, or to make these tests pass, we have, this is when we run, so we should be able to say test context.set for test case. So we have set for test. Let's do a actually, this should be void. weird, right? So we definitely need an test case. And we definitely need a test engine status for test case status. Here we've got test case, which is a guard argument not null in the test case. And then we have test case status, test case status. If I were to say set for test case, and then running, it's probably not going to make this test pass, is it? No. Okay. So what we know about, if we're in the context of a test, what are the things we know about? Well, the first thing we know about is we can set a test case to be test case. We can also set the test case status to be running. So the reality is I didn't even need this code. Even that code is premature, as is this code. And then we could go here. What if we did this in reverse? And we just did that. Okay, so now tests have access to test case information. That's a good step forward, right? But we have other things here which oops, not the test case runner tests. I'll move the test case runner over here. So here we are stashing the context. So if I were to go to test runner tests, which things can I steal in test runner tests? Also, what tests should I update? So here you're initializing test case is running, right? And here you're finished. Let's do it like this. And you're running. So I tacked these onto the passing, failing, skipping. All right, that's where I put these things. So do I have similar passing, failing, skipping here? I mean, I really don't, right? I just have messages, failure cases, Alright, async void. Test context inspection. I just want something that will pass, right? Which I think looks like this. So the testable test case runner overrides run and just returns the result. Okay. So yeah, I basically just want this. Don't need a summary. I don't know if I even need a message bus. Looks like maybe you're forcing me to make a message bus. Okay, don't make me make a message bus. Let's get rid of the message buses that weren't doing anything before. We pull messages out of that one. Pull messages out of that one. Pull messages out of that one. We configure the message bus here. And we pull messages out of that one. So we used it everywhere. Just here, we don't care. And we don't care about the result either. What we want to do is we want to say, make sure that runner dot after test case starting context is not null. We've got run test async context, and then we've got before context. So here we want runner dot we need to make sure the test case is there. We have the test case, right? And test engine status, initializing for runner dot after context dot test case status. Then your before your run, your before, you should be cleaning up. You should be running. Okay, that's gonna move. Did not mean to close that file, I meant to run it. That should fail. How does that not fail? Did I not put a fact on my test? It's fine. There you go. Expected in a test case, I actually got an X unit test case. Interesting. So your test case goes into the testable test case runner, which goes into the test case runner, which then gets stashed as the test case. Also, Test case runner tests 165. Why does this work at all? Yeah, why does this work at all? We're not setting anything here, so how did you get a test case? Oh, you got a test case. Because we're not setting anything at all, you got the ambient one. Of course you did. The ambient one pulls the test case from the test, which is why when we run this, instead of being the test on the class under test, it's actually the test method itself. Okay, I get it. Test context, set for test case. Come back. Test case, and then initializing, and then running, and then cleaning up. In theory, we should have a finished. I just don't know who actually cares about it. Alright, nobody to look at it. That is weird, isn't it? Like, finished as a state is, you can't observe it because for any place that you'd want to observe it, you're still in the cleaning up phase. Yeah, that's weird. Who uses finished? Test runner tries to set it. We have some test runner tests that look for it. I guess you're finished here? For test finished, you should be finished. There's not really any cleaning up state for the test case runner, is there? Because any cleanup failure no, because in before test case finish, that's a case for us to be cleaning up. Because we clear the aggregator, and if we come out of this with exceptions, and that means we have a cleanup failure, which means we're cleaning up. That's true for test runner as well, right? Because we clear the aggregator, we run this. This shouldn't be finished. This should be cleaning up. Now I don't believe we have anything. Like all these test runner tests that say finished, they should all now say cleaning up. And if I take finished away, All value is only available in a finished up state. Oh, that's actually not even really true anymore, is it? Because if you inspect this while it's cleaning up, and if nobody could ever inspect it while it's finished. We're not even done timing things. That's part of the problem, right? This should be timed, by the way. Should it not? Although test runner doesn't. Oh. Maybe that doesn't get timed. The output now, although the value may be a partial value because of further output being done while cleaning up. Part of me wants to take output away from here. Because if you have the test output helper, you can get the output. And you can get a more lime version of the output than I could ever stash here. Okay. Note to self. Execution time, I'm fine with that being a partial value. Yeah. I'm fine with that being a partial value. Okay, so over here we need to test case runner again. The test case runner tests. Let's see what tests we broke here. Cleaning up. Cleaning up. Let's get this test runner change pushed in as well. So we can skip test case runner. Oh, that S isn't skip. Damn it. Not stage, or any later hunks of the file. So D. Test runner tests. Can't do this either, can I? Alright, I'm not going to split this out. This is going to be one commit. It's fine. Core tests pass. So there's our context inspection, which is give us our test cases and our execution. Guess this is it. Let's take a look. Actually, let's let everything run in the background while we're taking a look. Okay, so test case runner, here's our inspection. We stash all the contexts. We don't always need a message bus. Test runner tests. You get a running and a running. Finished becomes cleaning up. Running, running, cleaning up. Running, running, cleaning up. Here's test. This is test context tests. All right, tests and test case. Okay, there's our test case runner. Setting, initializing, running, cleaning up. There's our test runner. So I have this set test context for test runner, but I don't have a similarly virtual one for test case runner. And I feel like I should. I don't know that I need it, but I feel like I should for symmetry reasons. Set test context. I think is going to just need a test engine status. Current test case, and a given test case status. All right, so our default implementation of this will be this. Okay. That should not have changed anything. We'll go ahead and run the tests again anyway. Okay. There we go. We have a virtual now. Set test context since current test context for the current test case and the given test case status. Cleaning up. Okay. All looks good. What is our message here? No? Go ahead and push that. Okay. That's pretty good. That gets us now test case. And I think, this is kind of like my only open question. Should output go away? What's interesting about test context is like there's stuff in test context that's very xunit.net implementation specific. Like we've already seen in the instances of iTest and iTest case, and also the fact that iTest output helper exists there as well. And these are concepts that really only exist for the underlying test framework. That is xunit.net v3 specific. And I'm wondering, by sort of confusing these layers, what am I setting myself up for? Like, we want to pretend that test context is something that's available all the time. But like an iTest output helper is not going to be available all the time. That's only going to be available in the context of not just test runner, but xunit test runner. So do we assume that anybody who wants to override at that level and not override xunit test runner, but instead override test runner, that they would provide their own implementation of iTest output helper? I mean, the concrete doesn't say don't use it. It's not in the internal namespace. There are no warnings against using it. Oh, it's weird. But I kind of feel like I want to remove output from test state. Because it's available in a test output helper now. It's the wrong test state anyway. What happens if I remove that? I have to remove that, I have to remove that, I have to remove that. Oh, see, this one has test result output in it. But I don't think it matters. Like, you can just go get it. Just go get it. Now I don't need to create post-run test state anymore. The output's not part of it. Test state from exception. My bad. Except that doesn't matter. It's going to break some tests. His execution times and his output. Where would we normally get the execution time from? The timer, right? We can just aggregate a time span into the timer. Okay. Now we've got test runner tests. Okay. Yeah, of course. From milliseconds. Let's try that. I don't understand. Days, hours, minutes. Seconds. Milliseconds. There must be some other timer action going on in there. Oh. We don't have a greater than, do we? Four failed. Still four failed, but maybe for different reasons. Let's get the 2112s out of there. So we have RNs on this is the output. I really don't like that. I really don't like this showing up here. All right. We're down to one failed though, which is test runner test output. And we don't know which one it was. Was 167. It's this one. Because we don't feed that output into here, it doesn't seem to be worth testing, does it? Right, this is fake output. Yeah. Yeah, that's annoying. Why, though? Because Test Invoker never gives you a clean test output helper, that's why. Always pulls the one from your test. Come right down to it. Like this should be an X unit test invoker test. Because test invoker shouldn't have an output helper. I'm definitely taking that out. It's not even really testing what it should test. And even in the case of X unit test invoker, really wouldn't be testing what it tests, which is that there is an available test output helper. And if you put stuff in it, you can get stuff out of it. Those things are already tested elsewhere. Okay. Git build. Just build. Smatter chew. Okay. Can't test exact here. Just test that we influenced it. And we remove the output. So we aggregate new time, and then we got rid of this. Empty, empty, empty. Don't test that there. We don't need this virtual. We don't need the override. We don't need output in test state. Yeah. Okay. I'm content with that. Almost done. Okay, push that up. Ubuntu in deep sleep. We know we have a new version of .NET. Might as well go pull it, right? We also have a new version of Docker, curl, GitHub command line, shit ton of system level stuff. Actually, what I don't see there is .NET Core. Well, let's do this then. Sudo service docker stop. Over here. Close the term, Ubuntu 1804. Okay, good. Start you up again. Pick up all your new stuff. Pull. And build. Oh, apparently I got a new version of .NET Core some other time that I didn't realize. It's fine. Alright, phone, what are you complaining about? Okay. It's fine, I'll do that in just a moment. Alright, so this is running in the background. I've already pushed all this stuff up. Been streaming for 3 hours, so time for a break. It's 2 p.m. Good time to break for lunch. Probably not going to stream again later today. Might stream tomorrow. Have not decided yet. We'll see. Yeah, I've got the next 6 Fridays off, so very likely to be streaming on Fridays for the next month and a half. The exception being the Friday when my parents are in town. So definitely won't be streaming that day. Pretty sure. Actually, they're flying out on Friday. Maybe. I don't know. I'll think about it. Okay, that's about the sum total of it for today. So thanks everybody for hanging out, and I'll see you next time. Maybe tomorrow.